The next session is titled Catalytic Capital, Capabilities and Communities, the three C's powering a paradigm shift in South Asian philanthropy. The session is all about anchoring capital by building regional independence that fuels movements for change, exploring opportunities of new and innovative forms of philanthropy in the wake of collaborative action, and elevating the scope of domestic funding. To anchor the session, I would like to invite on stage Abha Thorat-Shah, the Executive Director of Social Finance at the British Asian Trust. She will be introducing the panel members and moderating the session.
So good afternoon, everyone. It's always tough going after lunch, and so I'm going to try and make this interesting. It's hard sometimes to make things interesting, but I'm going to try. We have a panel that wants to make it interesting. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that we do very, very quick comments from each of our panelists and open it up to questions so that it stays audience friendly. And we only have, I think, around 45 minutes. So we'll try and keep it short. We'll talk about what we want to intend to have the conversation about, and hopefully the questions pick up the rest of it. My name is Abha. I am Executive Director at the British Asian Trust. I like having Gujarati lunches with Dalal, and I also like collecting people around me to work collaboratively, which is why this is such a big panel, because we always work with others. And many of the others are here. We have donors, we have community leaders, we have other intermediaries. And what's really important to me is that when we think about a collective, we think about not the core, what you might think of as the core capability of that person, but think about them in the fullest sense, and I mean the personal as well as the corporate as well as the others. So what I've told my panel to do is to weave in their personal story in their corporate story and talk to you not just from a sense of what their brand does, but what do they do? Why do they do what they do? So if they're capital, why do they bring capability to it? Not just because they work for Reliance Foundation, but because they're who they are. I understand part of the Harvard Club because you went to school there. And some people who are not part of the Harvard Club because they didn't go to school there. And how does that feel? And how would those schools never feel inclusive? So we will bring in the personal and the professional and the capital and the not so much capital as well. So, and I start tripping over these words. So Mr. Jagannathan, good afternoon. And apart from going to Harvard, you do lead one of the most mature CSR companies in our country. And I wanted to talk to you about how that building of a corporate working beyond capital works at Reliance and how you do it.
Thanks, Abha. I hope I am audible at the back. Okay. So I think I'll actually start with the overarching principle, which is a Gandhian principle, that is of trusteeship. Trusteeship for the benefit of the poor, trusteeship for the benefit of those who don't have what we have. So businesses are in a way kind of trustees for serving the people. And businesses coexist with society. Without the society, businesses don't exist, period. Because they're either consumers or they're contributing to the success of the business. And hence, giving back to the society is as much a kind of moral responsibility. It is not the corporate social, it is about corporate moral responsibility in a way. So with that very principle, we have what we call we care approach. I'm now talking for Reliance Foundation and Reliance Group. We are the largest corporate foundation in the country. And so I'm going to be drawing from examples of our experience and my experiences in doing this journey, both on the business side as well as the philanthropic side. For us, business and philanthropy complement and reinforce each other. They both are important to for us to serve the millions of people, particularly in India, where we have 1.4 billion people. Many of them don't have access to many basic things in the country. So how do we serve these people? Through the business and beyond business is how we look at it. That's why I said we kind of complement and reinforce each other from the business as well as the philanthropic side. So just to give some examples, like when we do business, we look at the last person in the society who needs to get the benefits of what we do. So from my personal experience, let me give you one story. 20 years ago, India had about 4 million mobile subscribers, 20 years ago. And that's when we launched our telecom business which was 2G business those days. And we said, along with roti, kapda, or makan, for those who follow in Hindi, mobile, right? That is food, clothing, shelter, and then mobile. The second thing was you need to bring the depth of distance to connect people. So we transformed that part of it through the business to empower people to be able to access what was otherwise a privileged service of using mobile service, right? And when I was going out to the markets, financial markets, to raise money, and I said, we'll add 10 million subscribers a year. And the country had only 4 million that time. We said, we will add 10 million a year. Nobody in the world believed at that time. But we changed that. And today we have practically everybody owning a mobile phone in the country. That's the first step of transformation that we could bring as a business, where we brought our capabilities in doing business, we brought our capital to kind of serve the lowest or the last person in the communities. And then we demonstrated once again through our geos when we introduced the 4G broadband. That transformed the lives of the people once again. So I'm giving these examples to illustrate how businesses can transform the lives of the people. Imagine a situation where if you didn't have the 4G broadband in 2020 March in India, how life would have been for those who couldn't step out of their homes for anything, for work or for ordering things or whatever, for kids who need to be educated. So that is the transformative power of what the businesses can do. That's why I picked up these two examples, easy examples for you to relate to. And then we again used the business capabilities. During the pandemic, I talked about March 20, that's when the onset of pandemic started. During the pandemic, in the early stages of the pandemic, we brought business capabilities in terms of serving the nation's need. For example, I'll just pick one example. We did many things, I'll pick one example, which was repurposing our business facilities, manufacturing facilities, to produce medical oxygen, 1,000 tons a day for the country. When country was struggling to source oxygen, actually, medical oxygen. So that was another that's another example of how businesses can bring their capabilities to serve the humanity, serve the people, and meet the needs of the communities and so on. So I can go on illustrating these multiple examples. And the most important thing is, it's not about the capital that we bring to serve the people in the communities. It is about the capabilities along with capital that we can bring and catalyze the efforts, not just by us, by various other stakeholders in the community and other stakeholders who can reach the communities. So that's the thing we bring, we combine in terms of serving the last person on the ground. So this is how I would put as the role of what we can do here.
So we've heard all week philanthropy isn't enough. And so here, starting with a wide example, talking about the company itself, how do they serve the community? From there, from Harvard to IIT, do engineers know what they're doing? Kalyan. So Kalyan runs PanIIT. He's a partner of ours in skills. They, as a bunch of IITians, have a very different approach to the way they think about skills, the way they think about skin in the game of communities. So from corporates to communities and to some IITians who may or may not know what they're doing.
So thank you, Abha. I think on a lighter note, so Harvard, I also did an executive education program, and when I called in, the event was happening, I said, I'll take a membership. Incidentally, we've closed it for executive education people starting this month. So the exclusion is absolutely there. So the whole idea of what the PanIIT Alumni Foundation, which is what I represent, so I have two sections in my conversation. One is the what, and the second is the how. So let's start with the what, right? The PanIIT Alumni Foundation is actually very interestingly built on the idea of democratizing the so-called Ivy League education, especially for the girl children in the vocational and livelihood, public vocational and livelihood architecture. So that's our stated official mission, right? And to some of you, I mean, I understand there's an international audience, so just to kind of give you a background, IIT, the word stands for Indian Institute of Technology. It's very illustrious alumni. The current Google CEO, Mr. Sundar Pichai, is an alumnus. We also have the Chief Minister of the capital state of India, which is Delhi, an IIT and alumni, and incidentally, the former Dean of Harvard Business School, basically Nitin Noria, was also an IITian. So the good news is there's absolute entrenchment in academia, in industry, globally, and in the public policy sector. So the idea was, you've seen how Mr. Jagannatha has illustrated the wonderful work Reliance Foundation as a behemoth. I mean, they are one of the largest groups in the country, and how wonderfully they are reaching out using all their resources. We are actually trying to bring the power of a collective, an IIT community or an Ivy League community. How can we actually come together as a network and give back? So that was the whole conceptualization of this, right? So, one of the questions that will come, and that's why I wanted to finish the what section, is why do you need technology folks in this, right? Because one traditional argument is you guys don't understand development. But our thesis on this has been that technology, honestly, is probably one of the largest and the most potent development tools we have today, right? Just to give you an example, India recently concluded the G20 presidency, and as part of that, World Bank brought a very interesting report on what is called as DPI, Digital Public Infrastructure, that India built around finance tech, right? The Unified Payments Interface, UPI system. It has leapfrogged, literally, the digital financial inclusion of what would happen in 5 decades to 5 to 6 years. Today, I don't even have the number, some 500 million transactions happen on a daily basis, and it changes, right, on a monthly basis, and it changes fairly fast. So the simplest example is if you today travel to India, there's a coconut vendor, right? Coconut vendor who just, his only skill is to just de-skin the coconut. He's not studied anything, but of course he knows which coconut is good, unlike mine. But so he actually uses a UPI interface. He's accepting digital money. He doesn't want cash. Or a lady who's actually a vegetable vendor on completely rural hinterlands does not. Phone is your wallet for her and for you. So this is the power of how technology has transformed financial inclusion. So just on the note, to conclude the what section, right, we are actually contemplating, and that's one of the reasons I'm visiting US, is to set up a very interesting social impact fund dedicated to women, collectives and entrepreneurs, which is looking at a very new instrument called micro equity. So far you must have heard of microcredit, which is what Muhammad Yunus and everybody did, but that's a debt instrument. But for entrepreneurship, you also need equity, because I'm sure Harvard business professor will be happy that there's a concept called debt equity ratio, which we still remember. There has to be, every entity has to be having a healthy debt equity ratio. Incidentally, equity should be 2x of debt, generally speaking. And Reliance is literally debt free. Some of the best companies in the world are debt free. So we are actually never given the benefit or democratized a product that is available to all the biggest companies in the world, to the smallest of the entrepreneurs in India or elsewhere. It's the same case with your street vendors in African American communities here. It's the same story everywhere. So that exclusion conversation continues, and we are here to really reimagine that. So that's the what part of the PanIIT Alumni Foundation. Let me quickly jump into the how part, and that's very important because we believe, just quickly to ensure that all of you are not sleeping after the lunch session, I just had 2-3 questions. Which do you think is the biggest democratic paradigm or system in the world? It's the market, right? Every minute a consumer is actually voting with selection by opting in or opting out every service and a product. So while we don't see market in the lens of democracy, it's the most democratic system that we have today. And it's pervasive, it's everywhere. So we believe in very interesting concept of bringing markets, communities, and governments together. So the reason why I was asking the second question is, which is the biggest philanthropist in the world? Naturally, the governments. So if we don't have all of these 3 partners, and the last question will come, who should decide for the communities? And our belief has been that there has to be active agency. that the community should have the power to decide what they want to do. All of us in these rooms will have very good intent, but we are not the people out there. It's eventually the power of this agency has to get into this. And one of the reasons I'm happy to sit here is that while there are a lot of theoretical discussions, I'm here representing, first I want to talk about an initiative which we've actually implemented, right? It's called the Skill Impact Bond. And I must take this opportunity to thank Linda from SIF and Abha, literally, I don't know how many years of her life or how many gray hairs she's gotten because of the initiative. She's done phenomenal work in putting together a very interesting instrument called Impact Bond. And I'm coming here to give you the results of it, right? At least partial results of it. And I'm not talking on my behalf today. There's a girl child or a girl candidate we train in our education system. Her name is Shobha Rani, right? And many of her students and cohorts, they've experienced phenomenal transformation. And I want to give data because we are sitting in the Harvard Club, right? So they actually had a family income of $5,000. And with this intervention, monthly income of this girl has grown to $2,000 to $3,000. That's 5 to 6x catalytic impact. That's definition of this, right? And she's become the sole breadwinner, right? I mean, she's actually overtaken her brothers. And this has happened with, not because we are claiming or attributing, with somebody like an Oxford policy management doing extreme vetting, as they call in Trump's language, to really prove that this is what has happened. And we also wanted to bring the agency of these girl kids into the system. So we have a very interesting skill loan model where they actually opt into the program by taking a loan. But we also assure a placement, just like I'm sure if you've gone to either a Harvard, Yale, Oxford, or IIT, anywhere, you get a job. So here also you have a job guarantee. But once they join the job, they have to repay. So this kid, in addition to drawing the additional salary, has repaid the $1,000, $1,200 loan that she has taken. So she's actually demonstrated agency, created credit culture, and most importantly, data for somebody like MasterCard to tomorrow, giving products of financial inclusion in much more active manner. So these are real results that have happened from catalytic finance instruments that we've seen implemented. And today, therefore, we represent a case study rather than a theoretical discourse that we've seen elsewhere. So I really want to take this opportunity to thank BAT and SIF for doing such a wonderful job.
Thanking later. I'm more cool on criticism, so we'll come back on that. But I'm going to on that. So you've got Kalyan talking to you about communities. You've got agency. You've also got communities in terms of people, in terms of what their academic qualifications are giving back. But from that, Payal, you're a strong advocate of private sector non-financial commitment to development, and you've got these sort of stellar examples. I've seen you rocking the world with this for many, many years. Do you want to bring in the personal and the professional into this and talk to the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully I can help thread some of the themes we've already have heard today. I think this week the exam question for all of us here in New York is, what can we do differently to accelerate progress? I think we've heard a lot about the headwinds that are really preventing us from reaching the SDGs. Depending on what report you're reading, we're 12 to 15% the way there. And so I think the exam question for us is, what do we do differently? And from a private sector international development perspective, I think there are three things that touch on what both IIT and Reliance has spoken about. The first is very much around looking beyond philanthropic capital. So philanthropic capital, incredibly critical, but so too are a number of other competencies. And if I think about the private sector, I think there are a lot of other things that the private sector can harness and leverage to really catalyze that impact. So the first one I would think about is human capital. The fireside chat that was just before this panel spoke a lot about data. And I think there's a real delta between what the private sector can do when it comes to data and what civil society can do when it comes to data. So one of the things that we have done, we set up an organization called data.org with the Rockefeller Foundation to really help bridge that gap and build that capacity in civil society organizations, including NGOs, to help them better use data and make data-driven decisions. And so a lot of our own data scientists will go and sit within an NGO for weeks on end, helping NGOs answer questions from the data they already have. Because I would actually argue a little bit differently from what the fireside chat panelists were talking about. I think we have a lot of data. The question is, how are we identifying the questions we need to answer and then working backwards from what the data we have? So that's one example in terms of how you leverage human capital. The second is around private sector networks, and maybe this goes a little bit to the collectives. There are some really magical things happening when the private sector gets together with other private sector entities to think about social impact. So bringing in the personal, both of my parents are micro entrepreneurs sitting in Texas. My mom does clothes and jewelry, so this is one of her dresses. And my father does antiques. And so very early on, I saw it was very difficult for people to be micro entrepreneurs. And so through my professional work, we've done a lot of work around small business enablement and how we can really help small businesses survive the volatility that has become part and parcel of our reality. And so one of the things that we are doing, again, this goes to in partnership with other private sector entities, is we're working with gig entrepreneurs on various digital platforms, Mercado Libre in Mexico, Grab in Indonesia and the Philippines, and we're helping using behavioral nudges, changing the behaviors of small businesses on the platform. So if a micro entrepreneur has a larger than normal sale, we've put in a behavioral nudge to say, hey, do you want to save more? Because what we've seen is that the more savings an entrepreneur has, the more they're able to weather volatility. So an example of how we were able to use some of our own commercial counterparts and stakeholders and to crowd them into this. Last thing I'll just say is I think there's real opportunity if we think a little bit differently about impact at the corporate level. So I think CSR and philanthropy and ESG, all incredibly important, but how do you also mainstream this into the day-to-day business model? And I'll just conclude by saying, obviously, MasterCard's a financial technology company. Our work on financial inclusion sits within the business. So we decided in 2020 that we were going to help bring 1 billion people into the formal financial system. We're at about 780 million, and we've been able to do that by designing products and services that are meant for the underbanked and unbanked. It's good commercial value, but it's also really good for local economies. And that's really what I think these conversations are about. How do we reimagine business to catalyze the change we want?
Brilliant, bringing that all together. So you have a panel here that's challenging almost all sorts of how do you do it differently, how do you bring philanthropy in. I've followed Ashif's work for the longest possible time, and he is reimagining communities. He's also reimagining spaces and thinking about how those spaces can be very inclusive. And again, he's going to weave the personal and the professional in to tell you the story of migration and perhaps more stories which we've shared over the years.
Am I audible? So basically we discuss about the private sector, like communities and the philanthropic initiative. Basically I will focus a little bit more about the power of the collaborative. When all these like the stakeholders like private sector, philanthropy, communities, and the government also, because nobody is here from the government, but I think if all these stakeholders can come together, then we can basically create a more in-depth impact or deep impact in the communities. So basically I will share a little bit more about my work. So globally we have about 1 billion people who migrate from one place to another place for the job and the employment opportunity. And out of these 1 billion people, about 60% people are migrating because of the impact of climate change, or at some level impact of the climate action also. And basically if you can take the case study of India, in India we have about 200 million migrant workers, and about 120 million migrant workers are impacting badly because of the climate change or climate action, and they need to leave their villages and go to the cities. And the cities are also not very welcoming, and they face lots of like the discrimination, exclusion. And the biggest problem is these communities are historically excluded. So for example, scheduled caste community or scheduled tribe community, they are already facing some problem at the source, and at the destination again, they are facing lots of challenges. So basically during the pandemic, we realized कि this is the whole a very big issue, and actually no any single organization or no any single philanthropy, no any single like the government, state government can solve this problem. But we try कि if each and every stakeholders can come together and basically work together, then we can change the situation of this community. So we started a collaborative called Migrant Resilience Collaborative. And in our collaborative, about 6 state government, 2 department of the central government in India, and basically about 36 community-based institution, NGOs, about 18 philanthropic organization. So different kind of like the stakeholders came together, and we try to develop a strategy where we can create an impact on these migrant workers. So as of now, we reach out to about 5 million household and about 25 million individuals through the initiative. But as I shared, the problem is very big. In India, we have 200 million people, and they required the support. And the biggest challenge is, as far as India is concerned, we have 7,000 benefits available for poor. So benefits means like various kind of social security schemes. And in the world, so for example, in Nepal, only 80 benefits are available. But in India, we have 7,000 benefits available. So the money is available, billions of dollars allocated by the government for the poor people, including the migrant community. But the problem is the community is not able to access these benefits. So basically, through our collaborative, we are trying to fix that problem. And as you shared, we are using the technology. And we are through the use of technology, we are trying to amplify the impact and reach out to the more and more people. So that's a one part of the collaborative. But the second thing is how we can like generate the awareness in the community and the larger society about the dignity of the migrant community. So these migrants contributed a lot in the economy of our country. So their contribution in the GDP is more than between 10 to 15%. But most of the time, particularly in the difficult situations such as like COVID, they face lots of problems. And Reliance Foundation, our organization, many organizations basically support the migrant through the like cooked meal and many other like the initiative. But that's like the short-term solution. So we are also working with the state government and the ministries of the central government, how we can fix the problem for a long-term period. And that's one thing is about the portability, because we have a federal structure. So most of the time these workers are not able to get the similar kind of benefit at destination that they avail at the source. So I think the portability is very big issue. In India, the government of India has started a very big program called One Nation, One Ration scheme. And basically we are working with the government ki how like each and every worker can get the benefits. So for example, One Nation, One Ration scheme is ki, like if you are going from the village or migrating from the village to the urban area, still you can get the food grain and the other food subsidy at the destination. And the third very big and the important issue is the role of each and every stakeholder is very different, and sometime in the collaborative. So as I shared, collaboratives are very powerful, but the same time managed the collaborative is also very difficult thing, because each and every stakeholder come with a very different perspective. Like the perspective is of the government is very different from the philanthropy, and the perspective of the not-for-profit organization or community-based organization is very different from the other stakeholder like the industry or investors. So in India, what we try, we work with the investor community. And if the investor community can also support the investee companies and put some pressure on the investee companies, you should do something for the informal sector workers. Because the whole economy or whole like the GDP thing is depend on the contribution of these workers. But most of the time, we neglected their contribution. So, and basically we are not recognized the contribution of these communities. So for example, our airport, our like hospitals, temples, these kind of like the hotel, everything constructed by the informal sector workers or migrant workers. But we are not discussing about their contribution. So in this collaborative, we are not only focusing on the financial support, on the like the social security of the worker, but also recognizing their contribution. And that's a very, very huge thing for the migrant community. So yeah, that I wanted to share. Yeah,
Brilliant.
Thank you.
As always, bringing the voice of the people to the conversation, and also the fact of the recognition of the voice of the people and that communication. I think this is a real C panel. I'm sort of tripping up on that. Linda, over to you. We talked a lot about what other than philanthropy, but what does philanthropy do when the others are crowding in? How do you keep us honest? And how do you take some risk, as one of the panelists before was saying? So let's talk both about keeping us there and keeping us edgier than we should be.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Well, we heard that philanthropy is not enough, but it can absolutely be catalytic. Catalytic funding is, I think, what we bring. Personally speaking, I'm a product of catalytic funding or investment. My North African grandmother was not educated. She couldn't read, she couldn't write, but she and her grandfather, well, my grandfather rather, made sure that they invested in the education of their children, including their 9 girls, one of whom was my mum, and she carried forward that tradition. And this is why I'm here today and do the work I do. So yeah, being catalytic is core to our mandate as SIF, as a private philanthropy. It's about achieving maximum impact for every dollar spent for all partners, including the governments that we work with. And in South Asia specifically, our approach has been to work closely with government at national and subnational level to assist them with innovation, technology, evidence, and best practice. In order to make programs more effective and impactful. And we do this across a range of areas, including work that I'm going to speak about now, which is in the area of girls' economic empowerment, gender, youth, etc. Specifically in India, we've used multiple approaches to pool funding in, using our catalytic role. And I'm going to highlight 3 approaches in particular, and some of those have been really powerfully illustrated by my fellow panelists. So the first one is collaboratives, indeed, because these partnerships don't just allow convergence of capital, but also of expertise, of voice, of best practice towards a common objective. So we're very proud partners of the Migrant Resilience Collaborative. We're also partnering with UWA, which is the national chapter, the National Indian chapter of UNICEF's Generation Unlimited initiative. And that's all about creating meaningful pathways for youth through skilling and employment. It's an initiative bringing together 100 solution partners across the country. And it's about really pooling expertise and funding to improve last mile access, especially for girls. The second lever or approach we're taking is blended finance, and you spoke about the India Skill Impact Bond. So development impact bonds are of importance. We pioneered some of this work through our partnership with Educate Girls in 2015, and are now a proud partner of this initiative. And I think there the role of philanthropy is really around leveraging CSR budgets. So how do we contribute to shaping CSR investments in India for skilling and for girls? And then the last approach is around technical assistance. So we know that technical assistance is underfunded in the social sector, and part of the reason is that we need more proof of concepts and sort of testing ideas before they can be adopted by governments or markets for scale up. So we've invested deeply in this area, funding of pilot ideas and experimentation, through technical assistance partnerships with governments. That's to build the evidence on impact and then make the case for scale up. So just to name 2, we did work on cash transfers with pregnant women in Rajasthan. We also did some work around addressing cost barriers for girls' education, also in Rajasthan. And yeah, these have been successful pilot tests that have now been taken up by state governments and also by other stakeholders beyond India even. So that's what I would say.
So that's us, sort of a galaxy of stars here talking about things you wouldn't expect them to talk about and themselves as well, which is important. So I'm going to let it out for questions. I think we've done our talking. We wanted to have questions. That's why we wanted to finish early. I can start seeing the hands. Should we take a couple, Shaija, and then do them in sets?
Hi there, thank you. I'm Ella Goodwin with Vision Spring. I'm going to ask 2 questions, but I'm going to ask the room to participate. If you are wearing glasses, can you take them off? We talked a lot about the ability to interact with the digital economy and tablets and phones and financial inclusion. If you got your glasses as a child, raise your hand. You are SDG number 4. You are glasses being access to your improved educational outcomes. You can put your glass back on, just if you got them as children. If you need your glasses to read your mobile phone and to do your mobile banking, raise your hand. Okay, now you can put them back on. If you need your glasses to do your work and to improve your productivity, raise your hand. Okay, now you can put them back on. There are some interventions that are foundational and that are cross-sectional. And in the philanthropy sector, we often look in silos. And so I'm wondering, in the CSR world, how do we think about interventions that are sitting at the cross-section, that are foundational, and that will accelerate outcomes across a wide variety of initiatives? Thank you.
Should we take one more question and then?
Hi everyone, thanks so much for your insights. My name is Jacob Cohn, based in India. I'm one of the co-founders of a startup called Bandhu, which is connecting blue-collar workers to jobs and affordable rental housing all across India. So we've been around for about the past 3 years and been through a number of incubators, mostly around impact investing. And what we found in the ecosystem is that there are a lot of options for the private sector to get support from people like you and groups like what you're talking about. But we're kind of existing in a gray area between impact investing and venture capital. And so my question is kind of, how do you thread that needle? How can we think of initiatives to better support these private sector players, especially if they're very small, like these tech startups, in tackling these large foundational challenges and issues? And especially as far as employment and financial inclusion are concerned. So thank you.
Should we go for the two answers? Who wants to take the cross-cutting one?
Well, I think you have touched upon a very important point. If you really look at the SDGs, you picked SDG 4, but you look at all the 17 SDGs. I can't imagine any one SDG being achieved without touching at least one or more. So just pick one, eradicating hunger or poverty, whatever. Poverty and hunger are correlated, right? So if you are poor, you can't afford healthcare. If you are poor, you can't afford education. So which one would you work on? So if you are working in a siloized manner, you know, one at a time, each one doing one thing and not connecting with the rest, that's a fundamental problem that we do have at a global level of trying to track progress on individual basis versus on holistic basis. This is a problem we have to address first at a very high level. I hope actually in the years to come, we will address this issue at every level. And in the implementation phase as well, we look at this with that lens of interconnectedness of various issues to solve the actual problems. The larger goal has to be the well-being of the person. It is not about hunger alone or poverty alone or health alone or education alone. The well-being of the person is the key thing that I guess we need to look at.
Second question, do you want to go and you wanted to add as well? You want to answer?
Yeah, so on the second one, sorry, I didn't want to kind of monopolize here, but you had touched a very important point of impact investing capital for the small organizations. One of the key ways to achieve sustainability in terms of achieving various development goals is actually to democratize the implementation, offer the solutions. Everything can't be free. While government, as Kalyan said, government is the largest philanthropist kind of thing. Government is basically doing the welfare part of it because they're collecting taxes for the benefit of the public, and so they are doing that. But we are, as in the private sector, any of us actually, we are catalyzing with innovations, with solutions, and so on. So if we are able to find a way to address this is a gap that exists, particularly so in India. I completely understand the point you are making there. in terms of the lack of capital to the small entrepreneurs who bring those innovative solutions at cost, I mean, rather at affordable cost to the people with grassroots innovations. So this is the issue which we have to address. I have to say that. We have to address that. It needs a lot of enabling frameworks. It needs a larger debate. That's what I can say at this point. We can always chat outside.
Yeah, I'll just add to what Jagannatha sir is saying. See, I think one of the things we've understood, right, and this is very interesting work PanIIT has done. We, for the last 15 years, have been working with various governments in India, right? I always, we work with a lot of entrepreneurs as well, right? One of the things I think, and this is important, it's really a question of clarity, okay? I think either you incorporate as a not-for-profit and access grant funds. If you're incorporating as a for-profit, access venture capital fund. If you expect venture capital to subsidize, grant capital to subsidize your personal profit maximization, that's something which is a very slippery slope, right? So we've observed, for example, we've consciously said we will be a not-for-profit joint venture with state government, where the state government has actually taken 40%, ceded majority control to PanIIT, and we have taken over public nursing education architecture. We are India's largest vocational nursing program in the country. 2,500 nurses, caregivers. I know there's a lot of discussion about pay parity, etc. If they get best education with technology, we give them simulators, which are exactly of the same company that is supplying simulators to Johns Hopkins here, right? Once you give them access to that, the pay market will automatically pay them the best salaries, right? So the important thing is we've had clarity on day one, saying impact first, profits next, okay? If you don't answer that question and you continue to be in a gray area, then the funding also will be in a gray area. If you choose and say impact first, non-profit, or profits first, for profit, then life is much simpler. And as far as we are concerned, you know which side of the panel I'm sitting. So we are very clearly towards the girl, child, and impact first. So, but I think that choice is very individual, but it's important to make it, right? That's what we've seen.
Ideas and thank you. There's some of us who have ideas on how we can actually prolong and extend and stretch every rupee and every dollar that philanthropy brings to the table by bringing in and crowding in some private capital. And Dasra is probably the right platform for it, and maybe some of you are. How do we share these insights and inputs as people who've been practitioners in say the hardcore Wall Street and the Bombay firms, etc.? We would like to contribute, and I'd like a forum and maybe a discussion around it on how we can stretch, because impact investing is a sustainable way of stretching every dollar in a manner that we're recycling the wealth versus it dissipating. So I would really, and I don't mean to consume this panel in that, we have ideas, we'd like to contribute. I'm raising my hand and saying, somebody please here to listen to my ideas, and I'd like a forum being created for something like this.
There are many people in this audience. There's AVPN in front of me here. There's Dasra, of course. There's Satwa here. There's Kois. There's many partners here. So I'm sure there'll be somebody who's going to put their hand up to say, yes, we'll definitely join the club.
Yeah, but you know, my point here being, it's serendipity almost that you run into somebody. If we can have a focus group or a focus session or a platform, we can all kind of gravitate towards it and not depend on happenstance and say, oh, I happen to have been sitting and talking to the person. Thank you.
We'll ask Harvard Club to make impact investing by giving this space free.
Okay. We have 10 minutes. I'm just checking if there are any questions before we can give quick closing remarks. Someone at the back.
Hi, my name is Caroline. I'm with Outcomes X. Thank you for such an informative panel. Outcomes X is creating a marketplace to buy and sell social outcomes similar so that we assetize impact and really put value on it. A lot of you have talked about moving beyond philanthropy and bringing your business, basically moving CSR into the business line. I'm curious how you have done that and how you've done that effectively to bring in leadership who might not inherently see social impact as key and core to the overall business's success.
Yeah. I can start with that. So I think it's a confluence of a number of factors. In MasterCard's case, we had and currently have very visionary CEOs. And so it was very clear early on that financial inclusion was a good business strategy in addition to being good for economic development. Our business model is around consumption and transactions. The more people that are in the formal financial system that are transacting, the better MasterCard does financially. And so there wasn't really ever a question. So for us, it's been about what more can we do? And the soul searching in the last couple of years, because we've always been incredibly strong in the S, because we knew very quickly where we could play, drive impact, and kind of have that double bottom line win. The soul searching for us was really, what can we do on the E side? We don't have a big supply chain. We don't have a massive carbon footprint. Where can we play? And so that was the exam question we were looking at the last couple of years. And where we currently have landed and what we've rolled out is, how could we help consumers be more conscious in their own consumption and understand the environmental impact of their purchases. So we partnered with Deconomy to create a carbon calculator for cardholders so that they understood the impact of their purchases, and that way they were able to calibrate to say, oh, if I buy that versus that, this one has a lower carbon footprint. So it's about thinking creatively, not only about understanding what the materiality is to your business and what the commercial opportunity and upside is, but actually where can you play and how do you really harness what you're good at to drive impact. But I think it was easier for our institution simply because we had some very visionary leaders who understood that there's benefit in thinking about the long tail, not just quarter by quarter. Do you want to add?
Yeah, let me just add to that. In fact, in our group, one of the leadership principles is that of community engagement. We have 10 things we talk about for the leadership. Community engagement is one of those 10 things. It's explicit requirement for all leaders to follow. So what it means is like you need to be conscious of the people that you're serving through the business or beyond the business, understand what they need, and be sensitive to their aspirations. Is your product or service going to meet their aspirations or not? It's not just the bottom line, go beyond that. While bottom line is important for the sustenance and growth of the business, in fact, the growth of business is what is going to be helping us, in turn contributing capital to the other things. So that's the way we look at it. So that's one key aspect that we look at. And it's about value proposition to the people that you are serving. Does it add value to them at the end of the day? And so long as you integrate all these aspects, then you get the end results in terms of serving the communities, whether you through business or through philanthropy. So many people have said that every rupee or every dollar has to be stretched to the maximum when we talk about, particularly when you talk about impact investment and so on, when in the philanthropic side, on the philanthropic side. So you need to be looking at the multiplier effect of every dollar that you invest. So these are the ways to look at this. As far as it's ingrained, actually.
And if I could just add one more tactical point, we about a year ago tied compensation to our ESG goals. So every single employee's compensation is impacted on whether we have reached our ESG goals. So on the E side, it's the number of trees we've been able to facilitate planting. On the S side, it's our financial inclusion target, and on the G side, it's gender equity and representation. And let me tell you, once you tie your compensation to ESG goals, everyone gets motivated.
Brilliant.
That is truly catalytic financing.
Yeah. So I'm going to end. I'm going to get them to all give you one last word, and I was going to ask you for a recommendation, but I want you to tell the audience one thing you might have got wrong in your journey. So if you could either go with a recommendation or something you thought you didn't do right, because perhaps we often learn more from our mistakes than we learn from good. But before that, this panel was meant to not be an echo chamber. I think we talk to people like us a bit too much. And I think when you really, really want to be creative, you've got to talk to people who are not like you. And what you then do together is much bigger than what you're capable of doing alone. And in that is that Dasra principle of the collective. Hopefully, we've given you a non-echo chamber panel. And that you can take away, perhaps challenged by some of it, perhaps inspired by some of it, perhaps uncomfortable with some of it. But that's a good place to be in when you're thinking about development, to really sort of come out of where you normally are. So where do I start? Something either you've done wrong or something that you want to leave as a recommendation.
I mean, the recommendation, it sounds cliched and it sounds obvious, but it's really this piece around strategic collaboration, leveraging the value add and the specific role that each of us can bring as a key stakeholder in driving systems change. And I think on that, you know, the question you asked earlier in the audience around the siloed approaches that funders, including philanthropy, have driven in the past, that has definitely been a learning for us, is that if you want to drive impact at systems level, one, you have to center the needs of the individuals you serve, in our case the girl, and really create this ecosystem approach around supporting her health, her well-being, her economic power, but then also sort of leveraging better and more efficiently systems level approaches, including those driven by government, right, that can really reach the most people, including the most marginalized, in an effective way.
Are we going to do, should we shake it up?
Yeah,
Okay.
All right. So I'll do both then. I'll just give one recommendation and one probably lesson we've learned. Right. A recommendation is interestingly, India just in the presidency had a very interesting theme called Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam in the G20 theme. It means that world is one family, one community. So when we think of community, we somehow have a third-person view of them, right? They are different from us. And we've actually, honestly, when we've designed our programs, like I said, when we democratized Ivy League, we asked the same questions. What would I do if I was the student in the classroom, right? We actually are much closer, and we are actually the community as well. So I don't think the community, as we think of it, is not a third party. We are essentially in a, I, me, we kind of a category. And the learning, the lesson or the mistake, thankfully we try, that's a constant temptation we have, is that, while the grant capital is always available, the question you have to ask is, do you want it to be a means to an end or an end in itself? And that question is very constant and always very tricky. So for example, we could just give 100% subsidy and give free training. But we've desisted and said we put that money into a corpus and actually give loans out of it. If you don't repay, it's fine, because it's already written off on day one. So this is the argument we made to India's largest development bank and said, hey, you can't get worse than what you're today, because 100% write-off is definition of subsidy. Think of it in the opposite manner. Let some money come back, it will become catalytic, right? So therefore, always the idea is to teach fishing rather than give fish. So because we're in the donor community, we want to hold power. I don't know, it's our goodwill, or we are sentimentally attached. We just don't want to let go. But I'm saying you have to design the system by design to extinguish yourself from the picture and let the market take over. And that's been our single largest learning, which we've taken back very strongly.
Should we go that way? Payal wants to go last. Do you want to go?
She wants the last words.
So, like most of the problem, and particularly in the current situation, when you attend any conference, any meeting or any conversation, so basically the few people are very much focused on like the system level change. Few people are saying ki individual level change is very important. Another conversation about the technology versus the community. So some people said ki community is very, very important. We need to work with the community. Few people are thinking ki a community is definitely important, but the technology can amplify the impact. So the technology, we need to focus on technology. Same thing about the depth or like the soul and the scale. And I think from my perspective, and particularly in my last 2 decades experience, basically if you use one thing, you can't like change or impact at a community level. Always you need to like use both the things. So for example, in our case, and I had a very interesting conversation with a professor in Harvard University, and he basically lead the whole technology related thing in Harvard. And I asked one question, ki if one woman raped and that woman required some support, how you can support that woman through the technology? And that person said, the professor said, ki no, that woman first required a in-person support, a hug or like love, and very like loving conversation. And basically that's very, very important, and nobody can solve that problem through the technology. But actually when you support like hundreds of thousands rape survivors, you need a very powerful technological tool to track that case. What happened in the court? What happened in the like with the mental health institution? What happened in the hospital? What kind of like the action taken by the police department? And you can track, and on the basis of that data, you can basically prepare your strategy. So I think both the things are always very important. And basically nowadays, what I realize in most of the conversation, we have most of the time like the people from the private, like nobody can basically sometimes like the a few people like the tech companies, they are thinking technology can solve anything, each and every problem. And the people who are working in the villages or like the rural area, they always thought we can solve each and every problem. But if you can see the impact of that organization, their impact is very deep, because they are working in 10 villages or 100 villages or 1,000 villages. So impact is very deep, but they are not able to scale that program. And basically when you use the technology and you are basically reaching out millions or billions of people, but no any depth is there. You are just registering the people, you are just opening the bank account and all these things. So I think we need to do a very candid conversation about that, how we can establish a place where basically we respect both the like strategies and approach, and we can use both the things. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, he made very powerful points. To follow that is difficult, actually. So let me add my bit anyway. So in this session, we spoke of 4 C's, that is catalytic, capabilities, capital, and capital for communities. I have 3 C's and 4 P's to add to this. The 3 C's are connect, communicate, and collaborate. So that partly addresses the challenge that he was talking about. You have to connect with people, you have to communicate the challenges as well as share solutions, and collaborate with all the like-minded stakeholders who can bring the solutions to the table. The 4 P's I am talking about is, which is again related to the partnership space, which is, until now everybody talks about 3 P's, PPP, public-private partnership. The 4th P, which is the most important P, has always been missing in the conversations, which is the people, which is the community aspect, right? He talked about 10 villages, 100 villages, and so on. That is the missing piece. That is the missing piece in the SDG formulation. That is the missing piece in everything we talk about. So the 4 P's are important for us, rather the 4P approach is important for us to really solve the big challenges that all of us are facing.
Well, a lot's been said. It's hard to go last. My recommendation is, I think there's a lot of amazing work happening. A lot of amazing models have been built, some that are really prime for scale. So I think my recommendation is, how do we actually surface all of what's happening? How do we understand the impact it's driven, and how do we prioritize capital to the ones that really have potential to scale, and where we can combine collective resources? That's my recommendation. In terms of learnings and things that we are not doing well that we need to, I go, and I know each one of you spoke about this, including the audience, intersectionality. So how does people, planet, and purpose and prosperity, how do those 4 Ps, how do they intersect, and how do we look much more holistically at these issues as opposed to looking very, very narrowly?
Can't follow any of them up. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this incredible group of people. Sorry, me?
Can you share the same question?
I like provocation. So I think for me, any piece of work that doesn't provoke me to think outside my way of thinking, I don't like. So if I work with people who genuinely just question whether it's the financial model or whether it's the way you work with the community or make me feel uncomfortable, I feel the best and most energized when I'm uncomfortable. And there were moments here as well today. I was going, I want to lean into that, and then I think, no, maybe I'm leaning into it because it's teaching me something that perhaps I don't have myself. So that's it. Yeah.